Hello, Bucks fans, and welcome into the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel Facebook Live. I'm Kassidy, joined by Jim here today. It is Tuesday before Game 2 in this Round 1 series of the NBA playoffs. Jim, before we kind of dive into Game 2, though, let's look back at Game 1. Bucks won, which Game 1 for them it is not an often occurrence. I think we looked back, they had lost 5 Game 1s of their last 6 postseason series going back to the bubble. So first of all, just how important was it for them to kind of get that one underneath their belt?
Yeah, I mean, as Brooke Lopez says, it's better than not winning it.
Exactly.
It gives you, protects home court to a degree for at least another game. And yeah, I mean, it's just look, it in a series, especially if you're a team like the Bucks, who you think or they think are going to make a long run, the fewer games to play as possible is the goal. They are the 3 seed. They're a favorite for a reason. And yeah, to not play particularly well either, Kassidy, and still pull it out is probably, the biggest takeaway for Milwaukee. Chris Middleton didn't play very well. Drew Holiday, until that fourth quarter run, didn't have much of a shot either. The bench didn't shoot very well. Giannis didn't score at all in the fourth quarter. And yet here we are talking about the Bucks winning Game 1. So to have all that kind of, what they may say or they would hope looking back, that was the worst game of the series, and yet they still won. So that's I think they're looking at it that way to a degree, right? That they could win a game that they didn't play particularly well.
As you said, not a hugely pretty game. I think they all use the word ugly, in fact, to describe it. As you said, that they're going to want to look back on it and say that was the worst game of the series. But I just read your coffee mug. That was funny.
It's an Easter egg for our viewers.
Nice. I like it. Do you feel that could have been the worst game of the series, or is that more, was it just an aberration, or was it a blueprint for how this series could go?
No, look, that's the 5th time the Bulls have played the Bucks. The first game of the regular season was very much like this one. The difference being DeMar DeRozan scored 40 plus, went to the free throw line 18 times. That he didn't have that success in this game. So I think if you're the Bucks, you probably figure they can lean on the defense again late in the fourth quarter, make key stops. But in terms of just scoring that few points, even the Bulls scoring that few points, I mean, that was like a 90s throwback, Kassidy. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, it's a 118, 100 type of game in Game 2 and you get more offense going forward. So I think if in terms of the points and just sort of the overall bricklaying from both teams, that's probably the aberration, not so much the result.
Bricklaying, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, because it was that fourth quarter, I remember looking back, they only scored 19 points in the fourth quarter.
And the Bulls scored 15, yeah.
Yeah, and 16 of those were by Brooke Lopez and Drew Holiday. They were the only two that did anything. Let's look ahead to Game 2. And if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. We'll try to get to a few of them here before we have to let Jim go. Let's look to Game 2, starting with what you have seen so far. I know you were at practice yesterday, watching a little bit of the Bucks and talking to coaches and players. What did they have to say? How did they what's the vibe, I guess you could say, in Milwaukee right now heading into Game 2 against the Bulls?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of funny. Head coach Mike Budenholzer said that, there was a thought of practicing or not practicing. He's like, it was kind of split. Obviously, they elected to practice. The Bulls actually practiced as well yesterday, Cassie. They drove back to Chicago, actually, following Game 1 to practice at home. And after what we just said about kind of how ugly that game was, it kind of makes sense. They wanted to get some work in. And while we don't get to see, it's like the Packers. We don't actually get to see practice. We just catch the end where they're sort of having their post-practice shooting games, free throws, three-pointers. And while Giannis Antetokounmpo smiled and gave sort of the PC answer when he was asked about his 6 for 11 free throw shooting in Game 1, he stayed after and got some work in at the free throw line around the half dozen or so baskets in the Bucks facility. So, look, I think when you have one of the top scoring teams in the league in the Bucks, to play that poorly offensively. 21 turnovers, many of which Mike Budenholzer admitted in the practice were sort of head scratching. I mean, the practice makes sense, but it also feels like those guys are going to have a little bit more awareness. Is that the right word? I mean, Chris Middleton he didn't speak after the game. He had 7 turnovers. He did talk after practice and said, look, a lot of those were just bad decisions on his part. So I would expect him and Drew Holiday to maybe be a little more careful with the ball heading into game 2.
Awareness meaning like now they're not caught sleeping, like it woke them up.
No, awareness isn't just in terms of the defense the Bulls are playing, maybe not making that particular pass in that moment. There were a few where Chris, I think, got caught in the air, and while he's done that before, that's probably not a place you want to be trying to make a pass like that. So just being more court aware, maybe getting that ball out a little quicker, in game 2.
They also talked about rust on Sunday night and rust possibly playing a factor in not a slow start, because the first quarter was their best one, but it kind of wearing them down as the game went on. Is that why you feel like they also chose to go ahead and practice the day after the game and take today off before tomorrow's tip-off?
It's interesting. Having covered the NFL for a few years before this, where bye weeks were a thing, right? Bye weeks were what teams wanted to get. This is the second year basketball teams have had that. And it's a different rhythm. You play 82 games and they're just sort of in this every other day kind of mentality that the 2 days off is a weird thing, let alone, look, the Bucs starters didn't play in Cleveland on April 10th. I mean, so they were off 7 days, from gameplay. And Wesley Matthews said as much, like it's just a different, or Drew Holiday, that you're doing some scrimmaging, but it's not the same. So I'm sure there's a little bit of rust. I think it's more, I think it was just more maybe game 1 kind of, I don't want to call it jitters, but some of the guys mentioned, hey, you're not really human if you're not like realizing this is the start of it. Right. And then look, give credit to the Bulls. They're a good team. They have been a good team. Alex Caruso is a very good defender. I mean, they kind of can make things difficult too. So, I mean, they might say rust, Kassidy. I don't really know if it was that, as in so much of, because we've seen them do this throughout the year. We've seen them turn it over 20 times. We've seen them miss a bunch of shots. We've seen the offense go stagnant. So, like, to me, it wasn't rust. It was just something we've seen from them before. And maybe in terms of the practice, Mike Budenholzer's like, all right, let's try not to have that happen again. So let's get a little bit extra work in.
Had to get that one out of the way.
Yeah.
Let's look ahead to Wednesday night, game 2 at, I think, 8:30 p.m. Central. So you're going to need a lot of that coffee tomorrow. Take a nap earlier in the day. Carl says it doesn't look like Ibaka is in the rotation in this series. However, I think his interior defense could be an asset going forward. I mean, do you agree, Jim? Could we see more Sergey at some point in this series?
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, this series I don't know, because Nikola Vucevic, for a 7-footer, he's got some ability to score in the post, but he's also going to stretch it to the mid-range, shoot threes. And while Serge Ibaka, you would think can get out there and do some of that stuff, Brook Lopez is moving too well. They're not going to leapfrog Bobby Portis, who's essentially the third big right now. And quite frankly, in these 2 games with Brook back, the last regular season game, this past playoff game, Vucevic has been, his on paper stat line has looked okay, especially game 1. But he's got to work, and the shooting percentage isn't there. So I don't know if this is a series for Serge. I kind of struggle. I mean, if Robert Williams the third comes back in Boston in round 2, if that's their matchup, maybe then. I mean, Serge right now is just a depth piece as the fourth big, and I can't see him cracking those minutes in real minutes in the near future.
Speaking of minutes, I'm going to twist this around. I promise to get to the question I want. Giannis ended up having to sit on the bench for about 5 minutes in the fourth quarter the other night because he was in foul trouble. Is that something that you think that the Bulls have figured out they can push him towards? Or was that, again, just sort of an aberration? Is it something to continue to watch in this next game?
I think it's something to continue to watch, specifically because Alex Caruso drew 2 of those fouls, I believe, on Giannis. And so, yeah, forgive me here. The dogs are they hear the trucks, the deliveries out front. That's
they're doing their job,
right? So Caruso, that's the interesting part because he's that kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's giving up what 60 pounds, 70 pounds, and 6 inches, and he's going to take the charge from Giannis. Now, that's one of those debatable calls, right, where ref has got to give it one way or the other. Blocker charge. Shout out Rex Chapman.
I was about to say.
It's Mike Budenholzer might challenge one of those. Billy Donovan, maybe. So I don't know if they figured it out necessarily, but I do feel like they are going to be willing to take that punishment in the hopes of drawing a charge, in the hopes of slowing Giannis Antetokounmpo down in a way that really no one else can. I mean, if he's going to be called for 2 to 3 offensive fouls, I don't think he's going to change his game, Kassidy, necessarily, but it definitely changed how many minutes he plays and when he plays them.
And Caruso might be a little tenacious out there. See what he can get. Jim, before Sunday night's game, you told me, I think if they win game 1, this is a sweep. Do you still feel that way heading into game 2?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, look, I think the Bucks are. I mean, you just look at recent history. I mean, Chris Middleton, Jrue Holiday, Pat Connaughton, Giannis in the fourth quarter. I mean, there's nothing to indicate that they're going to do that again. DeMar DeRozan can be, truthful when he says, "I'm not going to shoot 6 for 25." Zach LaVine didn't score final 20 minutes, so both teams can say that. But only one team is a defending champion. Only one team hasn't lost to the other without Giannis and Chris in 5 years. Right. So look, Chicago, it could be a game. I'm not all 4 of these games. These next 3 could go to the wire. But no, I think the Bucks hold serve at home court. Maybe it's that game 4, Cassie, that that matinee after a late Friday game, like maybe that's in there, but if the Bulls are down 3-0, I mean, who knows, right? How that goes. So yeah, I think Bucks win game 2 and they're still on track for a sweep in round 1.
As we said, game 2 tips off at 8:30 tomorrow on TNT, I believe. And Jim will have full coverage for you, as well as our colleagues Lori and Ben, leading up to the game, through the game, and after the game. So make sure to stay tuned to JS Online for full coverage. Game 2 for Bucks versus Bills. Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you.